Hello! In this video, I'm going to show you all the things that you need to get started with crochet. You're only going to need a few pieces of equipment, a little bit of knowledge about basic stitches, and some helpful hints that will get you started. So let's go. In order to get started with crochet, you're really only going to need 5 items, which I'm going to show you here in a little bit. The first item is yarn. I'm going to talk a little bit more about yarn here in a moment, but I wanted to get to the other 4 things so you'll really have a good list to shop for or to ask for if you were lucky enough to have some crocheting or knitting friends. The second thing you're going to need is obviously a crochet hook. I personally always like to say the word hook because the word crochet in French means hook. So when you say crochet hook, you're saying hook hook, but that's neither here nor there. The third thing you're going to need is a good pair of sharp scissors or thread snips. I personally always prefer thread snips just because it's a little bit easier to wield rather than a full size pair of scissors. The fourth thing you're going to need is some stitch markers. They're little plastic things that look a little bit like a padlock that you can open to put onto a stitch and then close, and it will hang out on that stitch. Then the fifth thing you're going to need is tapestry needle. Now, a tapestry needle is also often called a yarn needle. I personally prefer these large eye metal kind. They're sometimes sold in either wood or plastic, but I would say for the purposes of most of the yarn you're going to be encountering, you'll want to have the metal kind. The plastic kind can make a little bit of unpleasant friction on acrylic and other polyester-based yarns, so you may want to get the metal ones, and they do last forever. They usually come like this in a pack of 4, and I keep mine in a little case that corrals them all together and also makes it so that I can easily put them into my project bag when I'm working on a project. Now I'm going to say a little thing about yarn for beginners. So there are many beautiful yarns on the market, many. And as you progress in your crochet, you will get more and more familiar with different kinds of yarns. What I will say is at the very beginning, when you're first learning to crochet, you want your yarn to have a couple of characteristics that will really make your life a lot easier. So the first 2 things are that it's a light color and it's a medium weight. So all yarns come in different weights. They are classed into 7 different sizes, from all the way to what's called fingering, size 1, to super bulky, which is number 7. So what we're aiming for is a number 4 weight yarn or a 3 weight yarn. I would say go with a 4, which is called in the US worsted weight. In the UK, it's often called Aran weight. Unfortunately, in other non-English speaking countries, I'm not very familiar with the terminology that they use there, but if you see this symbol with the number 4 in the middle of it, you can be sure that the yarn that you're wanting to use is about in the right range and right weight. For the size of a hook, the corresponding size of a hook, you'll want to use about either somewhere between a 4mm and a 5mm. So that means you could use a 4mm, a 4.5mm, or a 5mm. To begin with, you really only need 1 hook, but that's something to note. Something else I will also say about the yarn is you want it to be a smooth type of yarn that is a solid color. There are many types of yarns that have this beautiful color change that's called variegated, which can be very fun, but when you're first learning to work your stitches, you want to be able to know exactly what you're looking at and exactly where everything fits so that way you do not get confused as you are inserting your hook into the various parts of the work. And that is one of the hardest things to learn in crochet, is where to insert your hook to achieve the fabric that you're after. So again, to recap, a good beginner yarn is a light color in a medium weight that is very smooth and doesn't have a halo, and also is a solid color. So I first want to make a note about crochet, and I'm going to make probably a longer video about this at some point, but one thing I want to always mention is when you are first learning crochet, it is not going to relax you. You are going to be tense, you're going to kind of hate it, and it's going to seem extremely difficult. Do not let this discourage you. You're going to have the expectation that crochet is supposed to be relaxing, but again, in the beginning, it is not. But once you get over that initial hill of learning and really start to get the basic stitches down, you will find it a little bit more relaxing. So stick with it. It's going to not be great in the beginning. It's going to suck, to be totally honest with you. But once you get through that initial learning hump, I promise you it gets better. So now I'm going to cover how to tension your yarn for crocheters. I'm right-handed, so I'm first going to demonstrate this in my non-dominant hand, which is my left. Now the way that I have always tensioned my yarn is this. So here on my hook I have a slip knot, and I'm going to show this to you in my left hand first, and then I'll do it again in my right. So you're going to take your slip knot, then you're going to lay the yarn over your pinky. Do that again a little bit slowly. So you're going to lay the yarn over your pinky, so going between your pinky and your ring finger, and wrap it around your pinky once like this. Make sure you're doing it close to this slip knot. And then you're going to pull your yarn and your hook and pull it over your other 3 fingers. And on the back of your hand, it's going to look like this. On the other side of your hand, it's going to look like this. The reason to tension this way is because you can feed the yarn really easily when you just slightly open your fingers, and that allows the yarn to slide through, as you can see right there. And then when you need to form stitches and you need a little bit more tension, you can pinch your fingers together, your pinky and ring finger I mean, and really get that tension nice and tight. So that's the switching between the slightly loose and the tight is what we're really after when we tension our yarn. Now, I personally always hold my work like this. I always take my non-dominant hand and hold the knot, the slip knot, or the work in my non-dominant, my non-hook holding hand. And I want to be pinching that knot, because therefore that way it doesn't spin around and around on the hook and make my stitches loose. I'm going to show you that tension one more time in my left hand, and I'm not going to narrate it, but I will show you also again in my right, because for those of you who are left-handed crocheters, I want you to also be able to see what that looks like. So laying the slip knot here, winding over and over like this, and there you go. And in my right hand, looks like this. Laying it between my pinky and ring finger, going over again on my pinky, and then again going over my other 3 fingers. So it looks like this on the back and like this on the palm side. And I would also be holding my work similarly like this, pinching it. Okay, a common mistake when I do teach this is I see students properly tension, or tension at least this particular way, and then they pull their hand like this. So they've completely defeated the purpose of making tension, because what you want is for there to be a very small space between where you can work and wrap the yarn around your hook and your work itself. So you just want maybe about 1 to 1.5 inches here between where your slip knot is and your first tension point. Now, what I will say is, I'm not dogmatic. If you have a way you prefer, if you want to tension your yarn like this, some people hold their work like this. I personally think that's a lot of tension in your hand, and being able to reduce the amount of tension in your hand will allow you to crochet for longer periods of time. Sometimes something I see watching other crocheters work is a tensioning that's like this, and hopefully you can see how pink the tip of my finger is getting. And I personally think that working with this much tension, this much grip in your fingers and your hands will lead to a lot more fatigue a lot faster. So part of the reason I developed my method of tensioning is because I do a lot of crochet and I do this professionally. So I want to be able to have a longer period of working time with less tension and also a little bit less movement. Now we're going to get into some of the basic stitches that you will want to know for your crochet. I'm first going to show you how to do a slip knot, and I'm going to show you how to do it a few different ways. I'll first show you the way that I typically do it, and then I'll show you another couple of methods that all lead to the same thing. A slip knot is, of course, a knot that will allow you to make it larger or smaller depending on what you need, and that is very helpful for when you're fitting it around a hook. So the way that I make my slip knots are I take my tail, and there's a little bit of a terminology I need to teach you. The tail is, of course, the end of the yarn, and the working yarn is the yarn that is coming from the ball of yarn. So those are two separate things. So please make sure you learn that terminology. There's a lot of terminology to learn with crochet, but I'll teach you a few of the basics today. So the way I make a slip knot is I take the tail in my hand, I make a loop around my finger with the working yarn, that's the yarn again coming from the ball, on the top, and then I take the working yarn again and I put it through the loop that I just made, and then I take both the tail and the working yarn together and pull down, so you can see how big that loop is. And then I take my hook and put it through the loop, and then I'll pull again on the working yarn, and it will now adjust itself to the diameter of the hook that I'm working with. Another method for creating a slip knot is this way. Take your tail and your working yarn, put your working yarn on top of your tail like that. Make sure it's over, that's really important. And then you take that loop and you rotate it so that it's again over the working yarn. So you have this little pretzel. The over unders are really important. And then this little arm that you have for the pretzel, you put your hook under it and then hold both the tail and the working yarn together and pull up on that tail or on that loop. Okay, I'll demonstrate that one more time. So working yarn over the tail, loop over the working yarn, this arm of the pretzel, pull up, put your hook under that, hold on to both the tail and the working yarn, and pull up on the loop. If you have a little bit of trouble with the other method, this method might help you out. Now, at the beginning of a project, you want to leave a little bit of a tail, maybe about 4 inches. For later purposes, you do want to leave about a 4 to 6 inch tail to be able to weave your ends in. But the first move I'm going to show you is, first, your hook. You should always have your hook in front of your yarn. So that's something to note with the order that crochet goes in. You always want to have your yarn behind your hook. So hook in front, yarn in back. Now the first move I'm going to show you is a yarn over. This is a yarn over. You're going to take your hook and your yarn. You're just going to push around it so that it is wrapped around your hook. I'm going to show that one more time. Like that. If you have trouble with it going into the narrow part of your hook, just keep pivoting your hook down until you have this loop in the right place. This is the basic move you're always going to use for all of your projects, putting your yarn through the next loop, because at very base, crochet is based on putting loops through loops. Now, the next move you're going to make is a chain stitch. So the way to make a chain stitch is first to make a yarn over. That is the US term. I believe the UK term is simply yarn over hook, which is the same exact thing. And then you're going to take your hook and pull that yarn over through that loop that's on your hook, which is your first slip knot. And that is a chain stitch. I'm going to show that to you one more time. So we're going to push against our hook and then pull that yarn over through the loop, and then the follow through that you always want to do is always to push that loop that's on your hook all the way back to the thumb rest if you have a metal hook, or the handle if you have an ergonomic hook like I have. All right, I'm going to show you that one more time. So yarn over, pull through, and then push that loop back so it is the correct size. This is a 5mm hook, but it's only 5mm here along the thickest part of the hook. It's not 5mm here. Oh, it's not 5mm here. So that's the reason for making that push. Something I see a lot of beginners make the mistake of is going like this and then really holding their yarn really tight and their hook really tight, and there's a lot of tension in their hands. So what I want you to try to do when you're beginning, and this might seem counterintuitive, but it's so hard, but once you've kind of gotten the motions down, what I want you to try to do is really try to, I'm very lightly holding this, hold this as lightly as you can. Because what will tend to happen when you have a really firm grip on something is this. So if you're holding really tight, you're going to be pulling down on your work, which means that when you get here, you're going to make a really, really, really tight stitch. And generally speaking, this is going to be really hard to get back into once you make your stitches into the chain row. It's also what will make your stitches really, really, really small. So as a beginner, please try not to hold everything so hard. I know that that's really a common tendency because you're really trying to get something and you're really concentrating hard, but just take a breath and fan out your fingers, maybe shake them out, and really try to just hold as you can, just maybe with even just a medium grip. But again, holding your work too firmly will cause you to have much more uneven stitches. So that is our chain stitch. If you have trouble with your yarn over like this, just hanging out a little bit too far down the hook, what I often recommend is to just hold that yarn over back until you're ready to get to it with your hook. And then pull like that. And then again, push so that your stitch is the full size that it ought to be. Now, it might seem like I'm belaboring some points, but in my experience as a teacher, these are things that are not necessarily intuitive, and I think a lot of other teachers may leave out these teeny details that will make a difference for your crocheting. Before I continue further with our basic stitches, I want to show you a couple of different ways to grip your hook. I'm going to demonstrate it in both hands so you understand what that looks like. So the two generally accepted or generally more common ways to hold your hook are the pencil grip, so it almost looks like you're writing with the tip of your hook. So that's what it looks like in the right. So you'll rest your thumb directly on the thumb rest, and then really hold the hook mostly between your index and middle fingers, and manipulate the hook that way in those particular 3 fingers. And on the left hand, this is what that pencil grip looks like. Again, resting your thumb on the flat of the thumb rest and holding the hook between your index finger and your middle finger. Now, I was in a Try Guys video a long while ago, and this was one of the points that was most commented on in the video. I personally do not think the pencil grip is very difficult, but a lot of people had a lot of feelings about the other grip and that I was apparently holding my hook incorrectly. I say, listen, do what works for you and what feels most comfortable. The other grip is the knife grip, and this is the grip that a lot of people got very up in arms about. In the right hand, it looks like this. So again, it's much like you're holding a knife to cut your food. So this is again, not the knife grip you would use for chopping vegetables or for food prep, but this would be while you're eating a meal. So resting your thumb on the flat of the thumb rest and curling your fingers over the hook like this. You are again mostly using your thumb, index, and middle finger for the manipulation of the hook. I do not use this style of grip, but obviously do try the two of them and see which one you like the best. In the left hand, this is what a knife grip looks like. Resting the thumb on the flat of the thumb rest and then curling your fingers around the hook like so. So that is what it looks like in the left hand. I also personally think that this causes a little bit more tension when you're holding your yarn. But again, if this feels really comfortable to you, do go ahead and use this. One other grip that is equally as valid but may appeal to some folks a little bit more is the overhand grip. So this looks very similar to a knife grip, except that instead of putting your thumbprint, the pad of your thumb fully on the thumb rest, you're more holding it likely like this, more at a perpendicular angle. And this is also a really good way to hold your hook if it feels more comfortable. Again, holding your hook more with those 3 fingers, that's always the key, is holding your hook with your thumb, your index, and your middle finger. And this is what it looks like, what the overhand grip looks like in the left hand. Again, holding the hook more at a perpendicular angle with your thumb, and then holding the top of it, or the opposite side, with your index finger and your middle finger. Part of the reason you want to have a yarn that's really smooth and not one that has a little bit of a halo on it, for example, like a mohair, is because in the beginning you will probably have the urge to unravel a great number of your stitches. Another term that you can learn here is called frogging. That's because when you unravel your work, you're ripping it, ripping it, ripping it. I'm going to make just a few chain stitches here. Now if you notice, what I'm doing is every time I make a chain stitch, I am moving my fingers up the chain, and that is in part to grip the work a little bit more readily. So that way I can make a much more even stitch. The first stitch I'm going to show you is the single crochet. Now in every crochet move, we're always going to be starting in at least the second chain from the hook. Your chain will look like this from the front and like this from the back. So there are two pretty distinct sides. The side that looks like a braid is typically considered the front, and this side that looks like a bunch of dashes, more like a metal chain, is considered the back. You're always going to start in the first chain, or excuse me, the second chain from the hook, because if you go into the first chain, what you're essentially doing is going to unravel that particular stitch. So you're going to insert here into the second stitch from your hook, and here is how to do a single crochet. So you have the loop that's originally on your hook, the stitch that you've inserted into. Now you're going to make a yarn over and then pull just through that loop that's closest to the end of your hook. And now you'll have two loops on your hook. And then you're going to do one more yarn over, and you're going to pull through both of those loops. You've now made one single crochet. I'm going to demonstrate that once again here in just a moment, but I want to show you when you're first beginning, something that might be very helpful is to mark your stitches. You're going to mark the beginning and the ends of your row, so that way you'll know exactly where to insert your hook when you reach the end of all your stitches. So here is the single crochet I just finished. The tops of most stitches are going to look a lot like a part of a braid, so that's what we want to go through. So I'm going to hopefully be able to show that to you here. So I'm going to put the little padlock arm of my stitch marker through both of those loops. So right here. So I'm now going through those two right there, those two strands right there. And that is where we're going to insert our hook once we get back to that stitch in the next row. So remember again, my yarn is in back, my hook is in front. I'm going to insert into this next stitch right here, this next chain. So I'm going to stick my hook in there. I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to pull through just that particular stitch. Remember, I always push to the end of my hook like that, to the thumb grip. Then yarn over and pull through the two stitches. Something I like to make a note of is when you're first beginning single crochet, or really any other stitch into a chain row, it's sometimes tricky to figure out where to insert next. So hopefully you can see how this is really stretched out, and that is where I've made the last single crochet I've made. This chain over here is not at all stretched out, and that is what indicates the stitch that needs to be worked next. So we're going to insert there into that next stitch, yarn over, pull that loop through, then yarn over and pull through the two. Do one more really close up, and then I'm going to get to the end of the row and I'm going to show you how to mark that as well. So next we're going to insert into the next chain, which is right here. I'm going to put my hook in there. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull through just that particular stitch, push my stitches all the way back to my thumb rest, yarn over, pull through both, push again all the way to the thumb rest, and that is what your single crochet should look like. So here is our slip knot. So that's our original loop. We're going to insert in that and create our last stitch of the row. And that is our last single crochet of this particular row. I've marked my first one right here, and I'm going to mark this one with a stitch marker. So this way I know exactly where I'm going to insert next after I do what's called a turning chain. Now, a turning chain is made so that the next row, or that the starting point for the next row is at the correct height. A single crochet row only needs one chain, so you chain one and then you turn your work. And what turning your work looks like is just this. Take your work like this and you turn it around like that. So here is my chain row. Here is the tops of the single crochet I just made. This is something that where a lot of beginners mess up. This is something to really know that you want to be able to see. That's part of the other reason to mark the tops of the stitches, so that way you'll know when you're working the subsequent row, the second row, which side is the bottom and which side is the top. So you can either do it one of two ways. You can either insert your hook and then take the stitch marker out, which when you're very beginning I would actually recommend, or you can just make a mental note and then take it out and then insert. But if you have yarn that is big enough, which again I do recommend that you have yarn that's big enough, you again will make it so that you will again use yarn that is large enough so that you can really stick your hook through the correct area. Okay, so I'm going to again do one more row of single crochet and then we'll move on to our other stitches. So I'm going to insert there, yarn over, pull through, push, yarn over, pull through two, push, and then I'm going to take my stitch marker again and put it through that so that I know on my way back that that is where I want to insert. Okay, so a quick little tip here. Again, if you're looking at the top of your work and it looks like a braid, you're in the right spot. And you want to always insert fully under the braid like this. So hopefully you can see that my hook is going through both of these strands. When I first learned to crochet, I thought only this loop, this one right here, is where I need to insert, but that was incorrect because I found out as I was looking through pictures in the books I'd borrowed from the library that that was not the correct thing. All right, so pull through those 2 strands, then yarn over and pull through 2 again. So remember, we're doing a single crochet, and something to note is that the single crochet will look different from the front and from the back. So this, you're seeing the backs of the single crochet, and here you're seeing the front of it. Okay, again, I am rotating my work so I can see the top of my braid, and I'm inserting into the right spot. So I'm going to insert here so you can see how it goes, but I'm going to show you from the side. It will end up being this area right here that will help you really see where to insert. Again, you're going to insert right in here. Again, right in here, and then in the subsequent stitch, it's right in here, and it's right in here. Okay. So I'm going to go all the way to the end of the row because I want to show you what happens then, so that way you can really see what the end of a single crochet looks like, or what the ending stitch of a row really looks like. Oops. If something like that happens, don't worry. You can always back up and or reinsert your hook. Okay, so now I'm to my last 2 stitches. Just remember, I have marked my first stitch so I know exactly where the last one of this row is. And like before, what I would suggest is when you're very beginning, just go ahead and insert under those 2 strands and through where the stitch marker also is, yarn over and pull your loop through, and yarn over and pull through those 2. Now we're again going to mark our first stitch, or the stitch we just made, so that way we know exactly where the end of our row actually is. And that is a single crochet. So remember, that is what a back view of a single crochet looks like, and a front view. The next stitch I'm going to show you is a double crochet. Now the turning chain for a double crochet is 2 chains. You'll sometimes see 3, so if you see 3, don't think that it's necessarily wrong. It's just a slightly different method of doing it. So you're going to chain 1, and then chain 2. This again is so that you can make your work the correct height for the next row. So we've made our turning chain, and then we're going to turn our work. Just a note, it doesn't matter if you chain and then turn, or turn and then chain. The order really doesn't matter. It just makes, it basically is the same exact thing. Now to do a double crochet, if you were starting this from a beginning chain, you would go into the 3rd chain from your hook, so that's something to know. So you're first going to make a yarn over, and again, if you have trouble holding that in place, you can always use your finger to hold those loops toward the thumb rest. And then you're going to insert into that first stitch. So you'll now have something that looks like this, where you have what looks like 3 loops on your hook, or if you count that second strand, 4. And then you're going to yarn over, pull through just the bottom, that particular stitch, then yarn over and pull through just these first 2, and again yarn over and pull through the second 2. Again, push. Make sure you do that push. You're now going to remove this stitch marker and go into that stitch you just made. Remember, it's going to look a little bit like the top of a braid. So if you have that, you're in the right spot. So our next insertion point is right here. Again, if we rotate and we see the top of our braid, then we know we're in the right spot. So we start with a yarn over, and we insert into that next stitch. Then we yarn over again and pull through just the stitch we inserted into. So as just a little bit of a recap, this was the original loop on our hook. This is the yarn over we made before we inserted. And this is the loop that we just made after inserting and pulling through. Okay, so now you'll have those three. And again, you're going to yarn over and pull through this loop, and then also the yarn over. If you have trouble pulling through both at once, just go slowly and pull through one at a time. So like this, so pulling through that one, and then if you need to push, go ahead and push, then pulling that last one through that second loop. I'm going to make one more and then we'll go to the end of the row and we'll make the last stitch together. Yarn over, insert into the next stitch that's right there. Again, rotating it, it's underneath this braid, so we're going this direction like this, and from the side it looks like that. Then yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through these first two loops. So with the yarn over it does look like 4, but we're only pulling through this one and this one. Then yarn over again and pull through those second two. And this is what this is what double crochets should look like. I'll do one more at my relatively normal speed, or at a little bit of a slowed down speed, and then we'll get to our last one. Here we've come to our last stitch in the row, and I'm going to again insert around that stitch marker, pull through. I have my 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And we're again going to mark that last stitch. The next stitch I'm going to show you is the half double crochet. It also has a turning chain height of 2. It is a little bit shorter than a double crochet, but they are relatively similar in size. So I'm going to chain 2 and turn. Once you get to more and more rows, it'll be more evident where the bottom and the top is, but it's just most important at the very beginning to know where the bottom of your work is and where the top of your work is. All right, so a half double starts with a yarn over. I'm going to insert into that stitch that you marked, because that's our first stitch. Yarn over and pull through. And then yarn over and pull through all 3. Demonstrate that one more time, or actually a couple more times. Gonna mark again our last stitch in the row, our first stitch. Going under my braid again. All right. We first yarn over. We insert into the stitch. Remember, I'm going to insert there under the braid. Yarn over, pull a loop through. Then yarn over again and pull through all 3. If you have trouble with pulling through all 3 at once, just go slowly and pull through one loop at a time. Like that. The next basic stitch I'm going to show you is the treble stitch, also known as the triple crochet. So the triple crochet requires a 4 chain turning chain. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you were starting from a starting chain, you would be going into the 5th chain from the hook. So a treble requires 2 yarn overs, and this is how you will do that. We'll yarn over once, and if you need to, you can pull that back like that. Then yarn over twice, and all this before you insert. So there will be 2 yarn overs plus the original loop on your hook, and then you will insert into the first stitch, and then yarn over and pull through. So you'll now have 4 loops on your hook, and you're going to now yarn over and pull through these first 2 loops. Then again, yarn over, pull through the next 2 loops. Again, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. And we're going to remove that last stitch marker and mark our next stitch, or mark our first stitch, the one we just made. So every row you'll go up and do this. You'll only need to do this at the very beginning as you get practiced at figuring out where your beginning and ends of rows are. Again, I'm going to show you how to do this. Again, yarn over once, yarn over twice, and if you need to, hold all those loops back with your fingers of the hook holding hand. We're going to insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull your loop through. You can have those 4 loops on the hook. Yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over and pull through 2. And yarn over and pull through 2. Do that one more time. Yarn over once, yarn over twice, insert into the stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, and again yarn over and pull through 2. Something I like to go into a little bit of detail about is how I like to hold my work as I am working. Now this is my preferred way to do it. If you find a better way that really does work for you, go right ahead and use that. So this is just my suggestion for when you're beginning. So something that I realized is as I form stitches, probably one of the most important things is keeping tension, and not just here on the working yarn, but really all throughout, so that I can really hold my work in the place that I want it to be and not have my stitches going all over the place. So the way that I have adapted to holding my work is this. So if you have a piece of work already built up, I'm going to show you like this, and then I'm going to show you how it would be with a chain, for example, just a chain when you're starting out. So I like to, with my yarn holding hand, so my non-dominant hand, I like to hold the work really lightly in my other fingers. So generally speaking, I'm holding it with sometimes just my ring finger and my pinky and my thumb, like this. And then with my other hand, with my hook holding hand, I'm using my middle finger and my ring finger, or sometimes my pinky and my ring finger, to hold the work away this way so I can kind of pull on it as I work. So what that's doing is kind of creating a little triangle of tension, as it were, with this being my first point, over here with this thumb being my second point, and here with my pinky and ring finger being the third point. So that way it keeps tension on the work itself, but also the yarn generally, so that you can really start to make your stitches a little bit more even. I wouldn't worry about this exact holding and this exact placement in the very beginning, but if you find you're really struggling with your stitches and making them a little bit more even, then this is something to really try out to see how well it might work for you and how you can maybe improve your stitches using the method that I'm using. So you'll also see sometimes I hold the work like this between my ring finger and my middle finger. So I'm going to just do a couple of treble stitches so you can see what that looks like as I'm working. So inserting, yarning over, so that's what that looks like as I am working. I generally speaking pull directly down on the stitch that I'm forming, or directly below the stitch where I'm forming, with the hand that's holding the yarn there. So if I were working this next stitch, I would be pinching right there, because here, right there, is the stitch that I want to work next, or that I want to work into next, excuse me. So again, I'm pinching right there, right under, because I want that to be one of the maximum tension points. And also the other thing is here, what I'm doing is being able to hold it like this. I'm able to make that hole a little bigger. Hopefully you can see right here that that hole is becoming very slightly larger as I am holding it and kind of pulling on the work. And sometimes if I'm working an especially long stitch, what I'll do is sometimes hold closer to the point where I'm working again. So for example, here with the treble, I might go up and up and up as I'm pulling through each of the pairs of loops. So one other thing I'm going to show you that the way that my method of tensioning really lets me control the yarn a little bit better. As I mentioned, what I like to do is I like to loosen the yarn by opening this space between my pinky and my ring finger. So that allows, I don't generally open it quite that wide. It's really only maybe a couple of millimeters like this. And then when I need more tension, I just pinch those two fingers together and it locks the yarn in place. So here with this next stitch, I'm going to demonstrate how that works. I'm going to work a couple of half doubles. So right now I have my two fingers pinched together because it's really holding the yarn there. I'm inserting, yarning over, and as I'm pulling through, that actually is where I want to hold a little bit more tension. So I'm pulling that through. And then, now when I yarn over again, I'm going to actually very slightly allow for the yarn to pull through because that slackening will allow that yarn over to be at the right tension again. And here I'm holding again to pull through so that there's a lot of firmness. And again, now that I'm yarning over, I'm going to loosen and now tighten, loosen, and now tighten, loosen, and now tighten. So that is why I recommend tensioning the way that I do, because it again allows for that very quick transition between tightening and then loosening, tightening and then loosening. And that is what will help you make really nice, even stitches. Now that you've learned the basics, here are a few of my suggestions on where to go next with your crochet education. The first thing you'll want to learn is really first master the movements before mastering your tension. I will say, generally speaking, the more you practice, the better your tension gets and the more even your stitches will be. So as you work, as you practice, you'll really start to notice and get into a rhythm, and that rhythm is what will help you begin to make much more even stitches. It will come, I promise. So movements before even stitches. The next thing to really learn in your crochet education is how to recognize your stitches. You'll want to be able to tell the difference between a treble crochet and a double crochet, between a half double crochet and a double crochet, and a single crochet and a half double crochet. With ones that are really different in height, they're much easier to tell apart, but as you work, as you make more stitches, as you do more things, you'll be able to tell the difference between your stitches. Then finally, the last two things that I think will really help your crochet education are to learn to read patterns and also to learn to read charts. I will make much longer videos about both those topics later. but I wanted you to be able to have a basis for where to go with your learning once you've gotten these basic stitches and basic concepts down. And happy crocheting!